Alright, in this video we are going to take a closer look at some of the art of the early Iron Age, and this means focusing in particular on pottery, which is the main kind of art that we find from this period. So I've mentioned a few of these styles before. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail now, not an incredible amount of detail because this is a Civ class and we have a lot to cover, so we can't focus too deeply on one topic. We could take pretty much any topic here and spend like a week or two talking about it. But we have to kind of keep moving. So I wanted to start with our earliest early Iron Age pottery style, which is protogeometric. So in the previous lectures, I mentioned that protogeometric pottery develops around 1050 BC, and you see it in Greece through about 900 BC. And it coincides with the use of compasses and straight edges to make decorations. So, I can make this full screen, I think. All right. So the straight edges allow them to make straight lines across the pots. And you can see these are clearly not done by hand. They're just a little too perfect. We also have circles that have been made with compasses, so they are perfect circles. And they especially like this concentric circle design that you see both on the left and right examples. Another aspect of protogeometric pottery is that its decorations are a bit sparse, especially compared to the preceding kind of Minoan and Mycenaean examples and the succeeding geometric examples. They are okay leaving large areas of empty space on these pots. So on the left, there's not quite so much, but on the right, you have a really big amount of empty space on the neck here and then the body of this example. So yeah, protogeometric is very simple geometric designs, largely just lines and circles, and kind of sparsely decorated. Oh, and not a lot of colors. We really just see this kind of black / dull brown color show up on protogeometric pottery. All right, so then from there we can move on to our geometric style. So geometric pottery develops in Greece around 900 BC. We continue to see examples through about 700 BC. The earliest examples show definitely a broadening of decoration from the protogeometric period. So instead of limiting themselves to circles and arcs and lines, we now see a lot of new kind of designs, but these designs are still geometric in nature. They are shapes and lines and playing with those. So we get the introduction of more wavy lines at times, of things like the meander, which is also known as the Greek key, the use of cross-hatching to fill in spaces. We also see that designs now spread to cover a piece of pottery, right? They really fill it up. They do not like to see any empty space. And in later periods, you're going to see that if there is a little empty space, they fill it up with background decorations. They'll just throw in little decorations all over the place. So here we have early geometric, on the left, a pyxis, which is like a little pot, and on the right, an amphora. I haven't mentioned, I don't think I've gone through the major shapes of Greek pottery. I might do a separate little video on that if people are interested, just so you know what I mean when I say amphora versus crater, pyxis. And you can see these things I've been talking about. Decoration covers them, first of all. They actually both have the meander or the Greek key. They have lots and lots of little bits of design. Some of these are these like little fish bladder designs, the vesicum, I think in Latin is what they're called, as well. So it's a departure. It's a definite departure from the protogeometric. Now, as we go further into the geometric period, we begin to see new kinds of decorations that are not just geometric designs. Starting around the early 8th century BC, for instance, we see the first animal motifs in geometric pottery. They show up largely as designs that go around the pot. So, for instance, on the left-hand side, we can see this band right here on a piece of pottery. It's called a register. This register is full of some kind of standing, waiting bird, something like that, like a heron. Up here you have a design of dogs. I think they're dogs. Sitting dogs, actually, I think. Although up here you have a little design of two horses that are not just a kind of pattern to repeat across the pot. Here you see something similar. You've got, again, these kind of standing birds that form really just a design that goes around a register on the neck of the pot. So yeah, we see the first animals here in geometric pottery. The design of the animals is very geometric, right? They're animals, but they're really just made up of kind of blocky shapes and lines. If we take a look at this horse, he's got a kind of triangle for his chest, a little, I don't even know, a little shape for his face, just like a little snout, a kind of circle back here for his hindquarters, and then he's just lines. He's got a line for most of his body, line for his legs, line for his neck, lines, lines, lines. So they're not hyper realistic. They're actually quite stylized and very, we call them very geometric. Starting around the middle of the 8th century BC, somewhere between 760 and 750 BC, we begin to see the first people in geometric pottery. So here is an example from around the middle of the 8th century. Now these people aren't like these animals where they're just repeated to make a design, although on this particular example we see up here women who might represent dancers or singers or something. They're all holding hands in a line. They kind of make a little pattern like that. But then we also have scenes, people doing things. So battles are popular, and you can see here I've blown up this bottom section, the body of the pot, and you can see that we have chariot riders with horses, and then down here we have what are called foot soldiers carrying spears and shields and wearing helmets on their heads. These people, like the animals that we saw, are again incredibly geometric in their depiction. The women make it very clear. Their entire waist up to their shoulders is just one triangle. Their arms are simple lines. They have a long neck, which is a line, and then a little kind of circle for their head, and their hair just comes down in these wavy lines. There's no attempt to make it naturalistic or realistic. There's no attempt to really be clear about features, right? The heads of these people sometimes have a dot for the eye, but otherwise you really can't distinguish any kind of feature. So again, very geometric in their nature. Now there's some themes that we see repeatedly on geometric pottery. Warfare is one of them, probably because it is of interest to them. Funerals are another, right? So funerals appear on a lot of these late geometric pieces of pottery. And I have a famous example, the Diplon crater from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in God's name because it was found at the Diplon Cemetery in Athens. And so here you can see, I've blown it up again, the scene of the funeral. You have here a table, the dead person has been laid out. This is the corpse. Here's an attendant. Here you have pets down here. Some sort of animals or pets probably. These might be family members. You can see they're still very geometric, and also they can't do children, which is actually pretty true of the Greeks, the entirety of ancient Greek civilization. They just can't do kids. They take adults and they just shrink them, is their problem. But kids don't look quite like that. So here you have like two little kids up here. There's a baby on the lap of what might be a wife. It's not quite clear. And then you have mourners. These people are mourners, which is why they have their hands up over their heads. They're in mourning, kind of like ripping at their hair and wailing. So this is the funeral. And the reason that we see funerals depicted pretty commonly is because this kind of pot was used as a funeral marker in this period of early Iron Age too. So we found it, like I said, at a cemetery. It was used as a grave marker. Not that the ashes were necessarily put in it and the thing was buried, but that it sat there and it was maybe sunk in the ground a bit, and it marked this is the grave of a person. So funerary scenes make sense. You can also see down here, there's still battle scenes. You have here a person on a chariot. There's actually, I think, a 4-horse chariot. They can't line up horses very well either, so you have to kind of count the heads that are sticking out. We have some heroes or people in kind of heroic garb with these big shields, these kind of shields that go in and then come out again. So these are scenes from battle. And like I said, battles of interest to them. A lot of their stories involve battles. Think of the Iliad and the Odyssey. A lot of battles in there that they're very interested in that. And it actually brings us to a question of, are these scenes supposed to be general scenes of warfare, like just a picture of warfare, or are they supposed to be references to specific stories of warfare? Either stories of warfare from that person's life or from the kinds of stories that these people like to tell. It's not clear. There's a lot of arguments about this might be a picture of a particular incident in myth and legend. This might be, but it's hard to be sure. And I'll give you an example. Here we have a nice little pouring vessel. And a very nice geometric design. You can see some registers of animals. You get your dogs and stuff here. But around the neck, there is this scene. So what do we see here? This can be difficult with geometric style. I'll tell you, this is a boat right here. It's flipped upside down. This person is astride the boat. Here's fish. There's a lot of fish. And I think all these bodies that you see here are supposed to have been cast into the water. So it's a scene of a shipwreck. Now, again, could this just be any shipwreck? Possibly. The Greeks are sailors. They must have encountered shipwrecks in their daily lives. But maybe it's a scene from the Odyssey. If you've read the Odyssey, you might be familiar with the storm that the gods send to Odysseus' ship, and the entire crew dies in the waters, and Odysseus is the only one who survives by clinging to a piece of the ship and eventually managing to float over to, I think, Calypso's island at that point. So this is the kind of issue we have. We look at a scene like this and we say, well, we can match it up to a myth, but that doesn't mean it has to be. And it'll be a little bit longer until we look at something and can say, that is absolutely a scene from myth. It is incontrovertible. Okay. Now, I mentioned in another lecture, though, that starting around the end of the 8th century BC, somewhere around like 730 to 720, we begin to see a new type of pottery emerge onto the scene. And this pottery is heavily influenced by Greek contact with the cultures of the Eastern Mediterranean. I mentioned that they have begun to trade with them again, thanks to some population booms and economic prosperity. They've established long-distance trading again. And so they're in contact with these people, and they don't just bring back goods, they bring back ideas. And so these Near Eastern cultures will impact Greek literature in this period, Greek art, Greek architecture, all in different ways. And so what they pick up here from the cultures of the Eastern Mediterranean include things like motifs, the kind of decorations they like to draw, subject matter, right, the kind of scenes that they want to do, as well as the style of drawing, right? I mean, we're going to see in a moment that these animals represent a significant improvement over geometric animals in terms of how realistically they are displayed. And I will mention, too, that it's also possible not just that the Greeks went there and learned about the art of the Eastern cultures and brought it back, but that artisans from the Eastern Mediterranean moved to Greece and found work there and introduced them to these ideas that way through immigration. So this kind of pottery in this period is known as the Orientalizing period and Orientalizing pottery, but we distinguish different schools, because pottery is made at a lot of different places, and they often have their own styles. This is even true in the proto-geometric and geometric periods, although the distinctions aren't huge at that point. We begin in this period to see the first real big split, and there's two major centers for pottery, Corinth and Athens. Now, Corinth, if you remember from our discussion of Greek geography, is on the isthmus that connects the Peloponnese to the mainland, and it becomes a humongous commercial center of Greece. They have a very distinguished merchant class, they have a huge navy, their ships are going all over the Mediterranean and engaging in trade. And this is one of the things that they are trading. This is one of the earliest goods, Corinthian goods, that's really getting traded. And that is the pottery that they begin to produce in their city. And so this type of Orientalizing pottery is known as Proto-Corinthian. It's this early Corinthian pottery. So early Corinthian pottery shows a couple features. One, they focus on animals by and large. There's always exceptions, but you see mostly animal themes on their pottery. Two, those animals include mythical creatures, and mythical creatures that they probably got from Eastern Mediterranean cultures. So on this old pay here, this is a kind of pouring jar, you have lions largely, and down here some kind of like antelope or something like that. And here you've got a goose and a lion, but over here you've got sphinxes, and sphinxes are not original to the Greeks. They are a kind of mythical creature that comes from like Egypt and Mesopotamia. And so this is an indication of that influence that is happening. Another feature is that they still like to really fill empty space. Just like in the geometric period, you don't see a lot of empty space still on this pottery. But instead of filling it with blocky designs, they really like rosettes, little floral designs. And this kind of interest in floral decoration also suggests the influence of the Near Eastern, Middle Eastern cultures from this period. They too were engaged in a lot of that. So on each of these, you can see little rosettes filling in empty space all over the pots. The other thing that you can really look to for Corinthian pottery, Proto-Corinthian pottery, is the use of both black and red colors and using them to contrast each other and pick out and highlight different parts of the creature. And then I will say, and you've probably noticed by now, they're much more realistic. right? They have learned, either they have learned how to improve their depictions on pottery, or they are interested in this style. It's very possible that people in the geometric period could draw a human better, but simply that was the style of depiction at that time. But we see much more realistic looking animals, right, with their bodies fleshed out and a lot more curve to them, which is much more natural. Okay, and so I said there's always some counterexamples, and so here's a piece of Corinthian pottery that has human beings on it. You have warriors here carrying their shields, and they're engaged in battle. They've got their spears, and they're all killing each other. Okay, the other major center that we see in the Orientalizing period is Athens, which if you remember is in the region of Attica, so it produces what's known as ProtoAttic pottery. Athens seems to be less influenced by Near Eastern cultures, and they're not engaging in as much trade, so there just may not be as much contact or as much picking up of the styles of that region. And so they look a lot more, their pottery looks a lot more like the geometric stuff. A little bit more developed, but a lot of it is like the geometric stuff that we saw before. And so an interest in human beings and in scenes, and a fairly geometric way of depicting people. So if we look over here, we've got farmers, right? This guy, I thought he was on a plow. No, he's on a chariot. And so you've got a warrior on his chariot, and you've got a horse here, but still looking very much like we saw before. This one, which is very famous, it's from the town of Eleusis in Attica, is a little bit more developed, but still is bulky. Their bodies are bulky and a bit geometric and not really realistic looking. But I will note from this one that we have a scene that we are certain is from myth, because what do we have here? We have three men getting a stick and poking out a Cyclops' eye, and that can't just be a scene from daily life. That's not something people experience. That's a story from the Odyssey. And actually on the lower part, the body, it's hard to see in the other one, but there are these monsters, which probably look really strange to you. They're definitely women. They've got these long skirts, but they have these monstrous heads, and there's like little wings. These are Gorgons. And so when you think of Gorgons, maybe you think of Medusa and just like a woman with snake hair, but Gorgons are actually a lot more grotesque than that in Greek mythology. And so here you see an example of the Gorgons. Another possible example of a mythical scene we see here, and this is possibly Theseus leading Ariadne away and taking her to his ship to run off, although this one is also debated. All right, so just quickly, I want to mention that there's other kinds of art being produced in the geometric period, including little figurines. These are tiny guys. They're never more than like a couple inches high. They're made out of different materials. We see bronze, iron, we see terracotta. We'll look at an example in a moment. But they're very much like the geometric style of pottery painting translated into 3 dimensions. And so here on the left we have a horse. He's very geometric. I love him. He's great. I love his little snoot. He looks like a snork, which is a cartoon from before you were born. And then here we have a guy in a centaur, but again, very geometric. One of the most renowned pieces of these geometric figurines is known as the Leftkhan de Centaur. He comes from Leftkhan de, which is a city in Euboea, and he's terracotta, but he's a lot more realistic. He definitely represents, even if not a fully realistic depiction, something that looks a lot better. Even the face is so fleshed out. The details of the face are so much more fleshed out compared to what we have seen. Also these hedgehogs, I love it. I don't know, the Greeks make a lot of geometric figurines of hedgehogs, or also these are actually little pots that you would store like oil or perfume in, and I just love them. They're so great. Anyway, the last thing I want to mention are the temples. We said Minoans and Mycenaeans, they don't build temples. The early Iron Age, we don't really see a lot of temples, but by the end of the early Iron Age, I mentioned, we see the first buildings that seem to be temples dedicated to gods and goddesses, permanent structures for the worship of gods and goddesses. Some of the earliest indications of what a temple looked like are actually little clay figurines. I couldn't find pictures of the actual figurines, so I have a line drawing someone did. But this is a little clay figurine. It's a depiction of one that we have found. And it shows a little apsidal building, the little kind of almost gabled roof here, a little curved, and a little porch here with 2 columns. It kind of looks like a Megaron, to be honest. Not the full thing, but a little bit like a Megaron. And probably this is what some early temples look like. They're just a little chamber where you would keep the god or goddess's statue and any offerings to them, and that's it. The first kind of a real temple that we know of from this period, though, is the temple of Hera at Samos, also known as the Heraium. It's just a place for Hera. And so when I say like a real temple, I mean, that it's monumental in size. It's not just kind of like the size of all other buildings. It's really quite monumental. And so this is the restored plan of it. And it's very simplistic. It is a very, very long room. The roof would be held up by a row of columns in the middle. That's why they're there. And then in the back, you have a little place where the statue of the goddess Hera would have sat. I enjoy this person's drawing, their rendition of it. I think this is probably quite likely what it looked like. I will mention that these are not yet built of really sturdy or expensive material like marble, which a lot of later temples are. These would have been made of things like stone foundation, mud brick walls, wooden columns, wooden roofing, right? Maybe with tiles. Because they just didn't have the wealth or the access to those materials yet. But it would have been pretty empty. You have your statue of the goddess back here, some of the offerings that are made to her. And in a Greek temple, only the priest or priestess is allowed inside to bring in the offerings. Everyone else stays inside. So this would have to be a priestess of Hera right here. Okay, I've talked quite a bit because it's all very interesting and fun. But thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah,